Buhari seeks Senate's approval of loan for social investment program.
Federal government approves 2 projects under second phase of Ogonokima.
House of Representatives open investigation on scarcity of international passports.
And Good Morning Nigeria today discusses the utilization of research findings and reports in Nigeria.
Contrary to the assumption in some quarters that research is just a project theme embarked on in tertiary institutions, now recent happenings reveal that research is actually a major aspect of everyday living, being the bedrock of technological innovation and human advancement needed for national growth.
That's correct, Jumai. Now, it's unfortunate that research findings in some developing countries usually end up decorating shelves, despite their numerous benefits. And those benefits, of course, include giving better discernment to issues of life and living, as well as the introduction of new ideas for advancement.
Now, coming closer home, Nigeria, with her very large research system with about 200 tertiary institutions, 70 research and allied institutions, powering research and development initiatives, and annual budgets running into billions of dollars consecutively, is not left out in woes associated with research innovations neglect, as the country is yet to confidently tell a first-rate story about the utilization of the numerous research findings conducted by our citizens in the country.
Now, while researchers bemoan the challenge of self-sponsorship of research and conference participation, which of course is pretty exorbitant, now only a few of the research conducted are usually published and findings utilized, while the nation remains in dire need of solutions to a number of problems that ordinarily should accelerate development.
And from every indication, the place of research in Nigeria requires a critical appraisal for a better national image and development, considering that most of her researchers outside the homeland performs credibly and dignifying well. So what is wrong with most research findings in Nigeria, so much that they don't see the light of day in terms of utilization? What are the challenges facing research in Nigeria, and what can be done to change the narratives of researchers and research institutions for national development? These are some of the questions that Good Morning Nigeria will be seeking answers to as we discuss utilization of research findings and reports in Nigeria. I am Jummai Yusuf. Welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague to also welcome you to the program. And we're broadcasting live from our Abuja headquarters studios on the network service of Africa's largest television network, the Nigerian Television Authority. Newspaper review, business and sports will of course feature in the course of the program as complementary segments. For now, here is Olajide Bello, who has the highlights of the morning news. Good morning, Jide.
Good morning, Kingsley. Good morning, Juma. And here is morning news. President Muhammadu Buhari has written to Senate seeking the approval of $800 million United States dollars loan facility from the World Bank. The fund is to scale up the National Social Safety Net program. The Senate has approved the reimbursement of 9.6 billion naira to Plateau and Borno states for federal roads projects executed by the states.
The NASSP, being a social intervention program, will stimulate activities in the informal sector, improve nutrition, health, education, and human capital development of beneficiary households.
37 agenda items treated in 7.5 hours by the Federal Executive Council in its meeting, and amongst them is the approval for the award of 129 billion naira for 2 projects under the second phase in Ogoni.
There are water projects that have been awarded under the second phase in Ogoni land, amounting to 22.8 billion naira. Approval was also given for the award for the contract for the remediation of newly identified hydrocarbon impacted sites along the shoreline of Ogoni land. And this is for about 107 billion naira.
The Nigerian Immigration Service has attributed the scarcity of international passport booklets to challenges in accessing foreign exchange to import the booklets. The Comptroller General of the service, Idris Jere, also told the House of Representatives at a committee conducted an investigation that major components for passport production are sold in international markets while assemblage and production takes place in Malaysia.
We realize money in foreign exchange goes to CBN Direct. We go for it, they say no, go and get money elsewhere, buy booklet and do. You can't do magic.
Are you sure the Nigerian Security and Printing Company have the capacity and the ability to operate this whole process?
There's a complaint that print have no capacity. Let's challenge them. It's a presidential directive. The president can also say this and say no. I have always come back that let's Irish mass technology meet up with meant to do, if they can.
The removal of fuel subsidies is a step Nigeria must take as the nation looks to build an economy that is less dependent on oil. At a policy session on Nigeria's post-oil economic future put together by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and Agora Policy, panelists set agenda for the incoming administration.
For every $1 billion Nigeria spends on fuel subsidy, it is $1 billion out of education, $1 billion out of healthcare, $1 billion out of power, $1 billion out of infrastructure.
And President-elect Bola Tinubu this Wednesday departed Nigeria for Europe on a working visit. The President-elect is expected to use the opportunity of the trip to fine-tune the transition plans and programs and his policy options with some of his key aides. In a statement by his media aide to the Raman disclosed that the President-elect will also engage with investors and other key allies with the goal of marketing investment opportunities in the country and his administration's readiness to enable a business-friendly climate through policies and regulations. The media office said already meetings with multi-sectoral actors in Europe's business community, including manufacturing, agriculture, tech, and energy, have been lined up. Adding that reviving the country's economy forms a major plank of Tinubu's renewed hope agenda, and the meeting is part of his efforts to re-establish Nigeria's importance in the global economic chain and create empowering opportunities for the country's huge youth population. Before leaving the country, Tinubu reportedly met with the House of Representatives candidate for Speaker and Deputy Speaker endorsed by his party, the All Progressives Congress, Tajuddin Abbas and Benjamin Kalu, who were presented to him by the Joint Tax Team of the House. He is scheduled to return soon for preparations towards his official swearing-in on May 29th. And that's it on the morning news. Good morning, Nigeria continues with Kingsley and Jumai after this break. Do stay with us.
Ask me what I want to be. I want to be a Lincoln. I want to be an historian whose mind must be clear, whose goal must be sharp, whose destination must be focused upon for developmental program. And once the foundation is right, Nigeria recovery is on your doorstep.
The 14th Ordinary Session of the General Assembly of the African Union of Broadcasting will convene from May 16 to May 20, 2023 in Abuja, Nigeria. Over 200 participants comprising professionals and stakeholders from the audiovisual industry will converge to deliberate on the theme, Impacts and Challenges of African Broadcasting and the Digital Transformation of the World. The session will also dedicate its attention to the following pressing topics: the acquisition and exploitation of broadcasting rights for major sporting events, the African Continental Free Trade Area (AfCFTA) as a driver of sustainable development, the African Health Agenda with a focus on the challenge posed by the spread of cancer on the continent, and the inaugural edition of AUB Show, an initiative geared towards promoting African culture, particularly its young talents. The 14th Ordinary Session of the General Assembly of the AUB is a 4-day event designed to galvanize and give impetus to African television broadcasting.
My name is Gifty Robremat. I am in Basic 2. I am from Oba Community Primary School 2. The people from Ubek, representative from the Abia State Government, headmistress and teachers from Oba Community Primary School 2. My fellow pupils, ladies and gentlemen, good day. We welcome you to this unique occasion. We thank our President Muhammadu Buhari for the school feeding program. Some of us do not eat while coming to school, but this school feeding has helped us a lot. May God bless our presidents and governors in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you,
Dialogue, empathy, love and unity. These are vital components of nation building.
For all to be well, we appeal that we should refrain from volatile, provocative, inciting messages and language.
Let's build and not destroy.
Since I joined this program don't help me. They carry the money, give me. I take join with the money, carry go market. As you see now, my market now come be fine past before. These are asusu that we make. The money now come big fast. I take buy this thing, I feed buy what I am now, buy carry plantain. Before now only carry where I they sell. But now I don't buy what I am at. Buy potatoes, cocoyam, and thank federal government. Then God bless you now. Up, the child don't come.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria, and up next is business news. The International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, supports Niger Delta smallholder farmers with $60 million. Details with Alika Okpanachi Arua.
The International Monetary Fund for Agricultural Development has contributed $60 million for the implementation of the jointly funded federal government Livelihood Empowerment Family Enterprise Project in the Niger Delta. The 6-year project, supported by the Niger Delta Development Commission, has reached out to about 14,500 smallholders farmers across Delta, Edo, Abia, Cross River, Bayelsa, and Ondo State within 3 years of its implementation. The country director, International Fund for Agricultural Development in Nigeria, while speaking at the official launch of the midterm review mission of the project in Abuja, said IFAD has contributed $6 million out of the total project cost of $97.8 million. The NDDC is to contribute $30 million, while federal and state governments would contribute $0.57 million and $4.88 million, respectively. Now let's take a look at Thursday tradings on the floor of the exchange. Business News, Alika Opanachi, Arua.
Thank you very much, Alika, for the business news package on Good Morning Nigeria. A review of some of the newspapers we have this morning is coming up next.
And our newspaper reviewer, Chukudi Okolo-Baja, is seated in the studio. Good morning.
Hello, Juma. How are you doing? Good morning.
It's good to see you.
You look resplendent.
Thank you.
Kingsley, good morning.
And good to see you too.
Same here.
All right, Juma, let's begin with you.
As we have some papers to review this morning, and I'm beginning with the Leadership newspaper, and above the masthead, we have, you can't find broadcast stations, court tells NBC. You can't find broadcast stations, court tells NBC. Find details on page 14. Politicians hijacked water resources bill. Find all that on page 6. That's coming from the federal government. And below the masthead, 77 trillion debt. IMF warns Nigeria against more foreign loans. Find the details on page 7. Insecurity worsening in Northwest. It's coming from the DSS and El-Rufai. Find details on page 6. We have the headlines in the Leadership newspaper. 10th National Assembly Leadership. Tinubu in secret talks with opposition members elect. We have riders, don't expect us to be loyal if zoning formula stands. That's coming from Garek D. Expect repeat of 2015 was a Betara 1. I won't quit race for Senate President, Izunasu vows, and allow transparent process, says Joel Onowako. And by the side piece of the headlines in the Leadership newspaper, our fleets can't cover Nigerian waters. That's coming from the Navy. Dangote Otedola Etsunupe for Zainab Marwa's book lunch. You find the details on page 6. Nigeria loses legal battle against Shell. That is on page 24.
All right, very quickly, we also take a look at the window page of the Blueprint newspaper. Let's take some of the headlines. With some already. Juma read from the Leadership newspaper, and not National Star that you saw on the screen a while ago. So Blueprint is up next for us. Nigeria in trouble. That's the lead story. Exceeding borrowing limits. That's according to the Budget Office. We are pushing towards 100% in debt service ratio. Buhari seeks fresh $800 million loan for 10.2 million households at 5,000 naira each. And then you have an acronym there. It says PEPT. That's supposed to be Presidential Election Petition Tribunal. Adjourns Obi's petition against Tinubu to May 17th. Court bars NPC from imposing fines on broadcast stations. Kwara. Court remands medical director for raping nurse. Sudan. JAMB to integrate student evacuees into Nigerian universities. And CBN vows to penalize shipping lines over undocumented exports. And also the New Telegraph newspaper, again we'll take some of the headlines from the front page. Above the name flag, amnesty. Federal government mauls renewed crackdown on tax defaulters. Oil spill, Nigerians lose against Shell at UK Supreme Court. And below the nameplate, EFCC arrests ex-power minister Saleh over alleged 22 billion naira fraud. And Biafra, UK appeal court to hear Kanu's case. And then 18 days to hand over. Buhari seeks Senate's approval for additional $800 million loan. Very quickly, we'll take other headlines there. Obi distances self and supporters from attacks on Adeboye, says opposition orchestrating ruse against him. Ministers, why federal government keeps approving contracts few weeks to handover. And NAS leadership, Akeredolu faults APC's zoning formula. Chukudi.
Oh, thank you, Kingsley. Let me quickly look at this bit from Nigeria's economics. Nigeria has limited borrowing space. Budget office warns. You actually read something from the blueprint which says we are exceeding it. I always say that from one editor to another, the headline could shift a little. So it depends on where they decide to take their story from. The bottom line is that the budget office says trouble looms for country, that's Nigeria, if it exceeds limits. Then National Star goes ahead and says Buhari ignores warning, seeks fresh $800 million World Bank loan. Well, the budget office hasn't said that the president has exceeded the limit. They're saying, please don't exceed the limit. I don't know whether $800 million would push it beyond that limit. So from one editor to another, a slight shift in thinking usually happens. At the end of the day, you're looking for the substance and the story. The most important thing is that we pay heed to experts' warning, advice on borrowing, so that at the end of the day, we do not shoot ourselves in the foot. Listen to those who know, you know. So that's what I'm going to say about that. Somewhere, which paper is it now? Anyhow, the Kaduna State Governor is saying that the synergy with the DSS has led to, you know, positive results in combating banditry, kidnapping, and the rest of it. Another paper decides to make it worsening case of worsening insecurity in the Northwest. Again, from one editor to another, the story could change a bit. If there is a worsening case of insecurity in the country, the questions we ask ourselves are natural. What is it we're doing we suddenly have stopped doing? What is it that is relaxing our effort? Is it that they have devised new ways and all that? You just analyze the situation and know how to apply, you know, whatever you want to do to make sure that the country remains livable for us. I know that the Naira redesign policy was partly the reason, you know, there was a dip in in cases of insecurity. Now that the Naira has returned and you don't spend 5 seconds before getting money from the ATM, these people, the old money.
I've not seen new money in the ATM.
Jumai, don't take me there, because I asked the other time, what amount of new money did we really print? I said that somewhere 3 days ago, but the money has come. Maybe we should say that the cup is half full of water, not half empty.
Exactly.
You know. Then lastly, because we are involved, I think that was the title of the book by Dim Chukwuemeka, Because I'm Involved, was his. Now, because we are involved, I am talking about broadcasters. Court has issued a perpetual injunction restraining the National Broadcasting Commission from imposing fines on broadcasting on broadcast outfits for perceived infringement.
What's your take on that?
Now, my take is, we have, because we're involved, we have been speaking, you know, cautiously about it. Because when you talk about these things, you don't want to portray or push out the argument that you're shielding yourself unnecessarily. But some of us have always frowned on being the monitor, prosecutor, and judge. It doesn't quite gel. And the judge, that's Obotosho, is saying that the aspect of the broadcasting code that seems to empower the NBC to do these things actually runs contrary to the powers of the court to be the ones that adjudicate on matters of infringement and all that. So for me, it is progress in the argument. And every one of us should come into discussing it further, well, when the courts have spoken. If there's no appeal against what has been said, then that becomes the order of the day. But just in case, for intellectual purposes, we want to talk about this matter, we have to all approach it with a good mind, with a broad mind, childlike, in a childlike manner. Because it is about making sure that the environment is safe for us. If you ask me, I'm not going to say because I'm a broadcaster that broadcasters are doing the best they can. The other time I was saying, is Nigeria now creating a genre in interviews, antagonistic interviews? I know about the adversarial, yes, which you still have to handle professionally, because you don't have to get your guest naked because you want to make a point. You still must maintain courtesy towards your guest, however terse the topic is.
Exactly.
But you can see some of the things happening. Peer group review will help broadcasters grow. But the point being made here is that a court is saying that the National Broadcasting Commission should not be the judge of what happens. That happens in court normally. I think it's something we want to applaud as moving us forward in the argument.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I was looking at inside the newspaper, inside the leadership newspaper, and I saw something very interesting, Kingsley. 10 Kano wedding guests die after taking local tea. And the tea, they say, was laced with different kinds of drugs. And some of them that died were just passerbys, just saw a wedding and people taking tea, and they just stopped to take the tea. The drug menace in this country is way getting out of hand now.
The question you ask yourself is NAFDAC slipping? Have they not been known to have created a reputation that has safeguarded our lives from unscrupulous people to whom the naira is king? It doesn't matter who dies in the process of their, spreading the fatal or morbid wares. So, if you ask me, monitoring, enforcement would always be the way to hold these people back. Whether you like it or not, Jumai, some people are just who they are. Almost incurably, insistent on doing things that do not extol humanity. Exactly. So when you have such people, the stick rather than the carrot is the way out. Let's become more careful, because whether you like it or not, gangsters will exist in a society, hoodlums will exist in society, unscrupulous businessmen will.
Doing a great job, arresting these drug barons and all that. And
NDLEA, sorry, yes. And the other time, really, I was talking about reputation as being responsible for why the NDLEA seems to be making a lot of progress. And I had to drop the name Marwa here. Yeah. There's somebody called Marwa there. So the difference is becoming clear. But it only means that more work needs to be done. More work needs to be done. The criminal will never get tired. Stop expecting it. It's a morbid expectation that crime would leave society. You're lying to yourself. Be ready, as they also ready to engage more devilry.
Okay. Well, I think the issue is one of apparent contamination of beverage that has been served at a wedding party. And so the appropriate steps will be for the law enforcement officers or the agencies to move in and take in the hosts of that wedding party and whoever was involved in the preparation of the beverage, which is
the groom is on the run, I see.
Wherever he runs to, get him, and then of course let him answer to all that, who prepared the tea,
yes,
who brewed it, take them in, because now obviously felonies have been committed.
Exactly,
and they will have to face the music.
Exactly.
It has nothing directly to do with NDLEA or NAFDAC, in my respectful view.
I agree, Kingsley. Just a minute. Yes. I agree, Kingsley. But the other day, it was you. I raised the issue of the days of the officer who practically came to look in your soup pot to see that you are following all the tenets of hygiene to get things done. The sanitary officer.
That was
we are lacking in that area.
Yeah, we are.
Yes.
Certainly, no question about that. But look, Kano has probably recorded some improvements in terms of tackling drug consumption. We had a Minister of Health in our studios some years ago, and of course, he's been a frequent guest on Good Morning Nigeria, when the issue of the consumption of codeine spiced cough syrup was being abused in Kano and other parts of the country. In Kano alone, it was said that they were consuming about 1 million bottles of codeine-laced cough syrup. And the authorities moved in and they were able to crash that number. I'm not quite sure what it is now, but certainly they've been dealing with the issue of drug abuse. I have a slide code. Excuse me. So that's part of what we have been saying. There are two other issues. One you've talked about, which is the NBC decision reached by Federal High Court sitting in Abuja. We have to praise Media Rights Agenda. Media Rights Agenda is an NGO relating, of course, as its name implies, to the rights of the media and journalists to practice. They took this matter to court following the imposition of fines on a number of broadcast stations.
Now 45 of them.
By the National Broadcasting Commission. I've always been concerned, and I've had cause to raise this, that the doctrine of fair hearing is not even observed 1 minute in all of this. You accuse a broadcast station of an infringement of the broadcast code. You try the broadcast station and the offending broadcaster in absentia. You impose the fine and then you seek to collect the fine. And more important, I've also been concerned because when you impose a fine and you collect a fine, that fine goes to the treasury, not to the agency that is collecting the fine. Otherwise, it becomes a source of IGR and ultimately a source of corruption. When a court imposes a fine, for instance, on a convict, the money doesn't go to the court.
It doesn't.
It goes to the public treasury.
Yes.
So why would a regulator impose a fine, and the fine is paid to it, and it is said that the regulator utilizes the fines paid to it by an offending broadcaster? So the decision is a right one by the Federal High Court. Of course, if it doesn't get to be appealed at the Court of Appeal and ultimately at the Supreme Court, then the decision stands. But I have an issue with the part of the decision. And this is, again, I say this most respectfully. It cannot necessarily be the case that every regulator or every enforcer of the law will have recourse to the courts of law before a fine is imposed. Not necessarily.
You have to be clear on that.
That's what I want to explain.
Yes.
Yes, Section 6 of the Constitution empowers the courts to function in the way and manner that His Lordship rightfully indicated. But take an example. If you a misdemeanor, such as a traffic offense, and you are issued a ticket, which means that you have committed an infraction, must that offender be taken to court before a fine, which is usually a nominal amount, before that amount is imposed and then collected? You will clutter the courts. And that traffic officer is performing an executive function. And His Lordship rightly indicated, yes, that you have to separate executive function from legislative and judicial functions, even though we know that there are interrelationships. But what went on with the NBC was that it tended to have usurped the power of the courts in determining whether an offense has been committed, in determining whether a fine should be imposed, and then, of course, imposing the fines and seeking to also collect the fines and utilize the fine. But I'm saying that the subtext, I'm making this point most respectfully to His Lordship's decision, cannot necessarily be in all cases that you have to have recourse to the courts. Misdemeanor, just give an example of a traffic offense.
Kingsley, you have a point, but the troublesome aspect of it is that you just mentioned a physically evident infraction when you mentioned the traffic infringement and all that. That one is perceivable. You can easily determine that. The NBC thing and the stations matter borders on the judgmental. Whose judgment is really what constitutes a gory sin, for instance? To what extent can... So there are gray areas in the... So you can't really match the two of them. But I totally agree with you. But it's not everything.
I know the argument can be... The argument, what I'm saying now, can be countered by somebody saying, look, That's why you have a mobile court, and a mobile court is set up by law. Somebody commits a traffic offense, and then you take the person to a mobile court. But there are jurisdictions. There are jurisdictions, you go to jurisdictions, they give you a ticket. There's no mobile court because of the difficulties you have in tracing. In tracing, people have no fixed address, and then they drive anyhow, and the number plates on their vehicles are sometimes even fake and otherwise. And so they are fleeing from the law.
You give them a ticket, they don't return to the redeeming office.
You have no trace whatsoever, so you get them there. So even then, there are procedures to follow with those kinds of courts. But the issue with the NBC was always this: their decision was subjective. Subjective.
That's it.
And then in making that subjective decision, you don't give the other side the opportunity of defending themselves or even responding.
No fair
you just
hearing.
say, this is what we have found out that I don't like Kingsley's appearance this morning. I'm not saying that's reductionist. It's reductionist. But we don't what he said. He was against the that. Fine, NTA pay fine of.
It shouldn't work that way.
Of 5 billion. It doesn't work that way.
It shouldn't work.
Sometimes that's the way we abuse our powers in this country.
Yeah.
Second point I want to raise, and that has to do with a question of borrowing. Well, government agencies themselves are also warning that we are reaching the limits of our borrowing. We are reaching the limits. Nigerians will recall that in the 80s and 90s, up until 2006, Nigeria labored under a huge debt burden. At some point, we didn't even know how much we were owing.
Yes.
It was only until Obasanjo's regime as a president of the Federal Republic that Nigeria was able to get out of debt to the London and Paris clubs. You will say these were private creditors. We were able to get out of those debts in 2006. And we saw, of course, what happened because our policy space was then expanded. We were freed from debt. Now, today, how much are we owing? We keep borrowing. Many will argue, and I've heard the argument also from the Minister of Finance, that these are long-term facilities. These are facilities with low interest.
They are still going to be repaid.
Absolutely. That these are facilities with low interest tenors and so on and so forth, usually from the World Bank and other multilateral agencies, not from the private creditors. But we also owe private creditors because we have issued bonds. We have issued bonds, and those bonds, you have to pay those bonds. They are sovereign debts. Now, one of the reasons why the Debt Management Office was created was to ensure that Nigeria, particularly the subnational entities, don't go overboard in borrowing. Now, what is the caution that the Debt Management Office is throwing in at this material time? How could we be using about 100% or 80% or more in debt servicing? How much then do you have available for other things? Now, part of the headline I'm reading, part of the rider from Blueprint, fresh loan $800 million for 10.2 million households at 5,000 naira each. Are you borrowing for consumption or you are borrowing for production? You follow? Are you borrowing for consumption or borrowing for production? If the purpose is to say 5,000 naira, yes, we know that there are persons who are truly poor in our country, but what will 5,000 do? At the end of the day, since we've been, what are the outcomes? What are the outcomes of our investment in this purpose? Have we done our research? And yet there is a number that is carried on the side, which says that we have about 133 million dimensionally poor Nigerians. In spite of this?
Yes, it's everybody in the household getting 5,000 naira.
Not everybody. It's a household.
It's just a household itself.
Persons who are poor, who need to get this, but what is it that can be done? To energize them, get them into the productive field. I think those are more critical because
field.
At the end of the day, you and I will be responsible for the repayment of these monies.
Exactly. Well, that would be a topic. I think it should be a full-blown topic on this program in the future. Thank you, Chukwudi, for coming on Good Morning Nigeria. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you. Kingsley has talked cold out of his system.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a break now. When we return, our conversation will begin. Do stay.
My name is Mary Jolie and I am from Ogun State, but I'm based in Lagos. I've just recently taken a trip to Ibadan, and in returning I decided to take the train. So I said, I'm not so sure, but I'm willing to try.
We thank God that the commencement of this present administration, railway was at a very, very low ebb. And when they came, they took the bull by the horn.
And I'm really happy that I tried. This was probably the most seamless journey I've had since I've been in Nigeria. For example, the train left on time. I was not expecting it to leave on time. 8 a.m., we were on the move. I think it's an amazing alternative to being on the road, especially with just the traffic. It's quite intense, there's insecurity, and it would be amazing to see the government invest a bit more into more trains going into other cities and states. It would really free up the congestion that takes place on the road and leisure type of experience within Nigeria.
The counsel of our fathers.
My advice to these young people is please do not take us back to those harrowing days. You probably do not know what it is.
Nigerian youths, let's build our nation together.
REFARM is the umbrella association of the over 12 million Nigerian rice farmers. Through the administration of good and quality extension services, the Nigerian rice farmer has imbibed good agronomic practices, as a result of which the average yield per hectare, which used to be 1 ton as at 2015, is today 5 metric tons. This has resulted to the increase of the national production from 3 million per annum to 9 million tons per annum. As a result of this, today Nigeria is the largest producer of rice in Africa. Since the beginning of 2015, or the beginning of Ankobora program, Nigeria has officially not imported any rice into the country. All these successes could not have been achieved without the political will of Mr. President.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. Let's now join Oyeyemi Ajayi for a peek into our discussion on utilizing research findings and reports.
Research is said and believed to be the bedrock of technological advancement of every society. It is the nucleus of growth of every nation. Experts say global development can only be achieved with solid reliance on research, technology and innovation. But how much research do countries engage in, and how much of implementations are achieved? On a daily basis, human beings are faced with numerous problems. These problems are educational, psychological, economical, social and business-oriented in nature. In order to surmount these obstacles, man has to take definite steps. And one of the most important methods of solving problems is through research. One of the qualities of research is that it must be problem-solving for it to be meaningful. A good research must also be self-correcting with the ability to stimulate further studies. The developed countries, as they are referred to, are built on the wings of research and its implementation in all strata of life. However, the full use and impacts of many researches in Nigeria are still lacking. Reports show that the nation has a very large research system with nearly 200 universities that employed more than 60,000 academic staff at the end of the 2019 and findings from other technical institutions, but one impeding factor is funding, as less attention is being given to funding of research activities in the country. There is also the lack of motivation and training to do research. These observers say is capable of hindering the country's achievement of sustainable development goals. How can Nigeria be encouraged to engage more in research? What efforts should be put in place by the authorities towards effective utilization of research findings? These are some questions guests will be answering shortly. All right, thank you very much for that background. With us in the studios now to discuss utilization of research findings and reports Let's welcome distinguished Senator Sabi Abdullahi. Senator Aliu Sabi Abdullahi, of course, is the Deputy Chief Whip of the Senate. And before then, he had been in the public service in the agricultural sector. So we're glad to have you on the program this morning.
Thank you very much for having me, and good morning, our viewers.
Also here with us in the studios is the immediate past National Chairman, Academic Pharmacists in Nigeria, Professor Martins Emeje, who is representing the Director General of NIPRID, which is the Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development. Professor Emeje, we're glad to have you this morning.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and good morning, everyone.
And we also have joining us via Zoom from Lagos, the DG CEO, National Institute of Medical Research, Professor Babatunde Salako. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Nigerians.
And also via Zoom, we're being joined by the Associate Professor of Pharmaceuticals and Pharmaceutical Technology, Faculty of Pharmacy, University of Lagos, who is also joining us via Zoom. She's Editor-in-Chief, Nigerian Journal of Pharmacy, Dr. Margaret Olomonia. You're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria. I hope I got that name right.
Olomonia.
Yes, you did. Good morning to you, and thank you for having me here.
All right, it's our pleasure to have all our guests this morning. I want to start this conversation with Professor Salako. Professor Salako, you were with us a couple of weeks ago when we focused on vaccine production in Nigeria. And of course, we had a number of your other distinguished colleagues on set to examine the issue. And the background information that you all provided on that occasion suggested that a lot of work, a lot of research had actually gone on in the past. But of course, we seem to have abandoned some of that. But that there were new initiatives to ensure that we're back into the research mode of what we're doing. But today, our focus is actually on the utilization of existing research findings. Because there's no doubt about it that Nigerian researchers have been working and they are still working. There are challenges, of course, with their work, but there are pre-existing research findings that we say are on the shelves, unutilized, and some other countries or companies abroad will come, pick them, of course, convert them into products and then resell them to us. So in terms of the value chain of research, because research cannot just be research for its own purpose, but ultimately for purposes of utilization, what is it that is missing in our environment?
Thank you very much. Research in Nigeria and university over the past years, I must say, largely has focused on researchers' career development, much more than seeing the research result being used. And so oftentimes, when a researcher completes a project, the interest is in publishing in journals of high impact, visible to his colleagues who may be able to recognize his contribution to science. And soon after that, researcher is satisfied, whereas it needs to be taken further to ensure that the product of such research is taken to bedside, for example, if it's medical research, taken to the market, becomes policy where it is relevant to government policy and needs. Now, this area is missing. And of recent, we are beginning to realize that researchers need to push their research into the market place. Again, within the universities, not many universities have units, or should I say, a small startup companies that could take the product of research, starting from patenting, to meet the users of research, the new knowledge that has been generated. And this is something that we have to begin to think about, so that research institutes and universities should establish such companies or create such units or departments within their university so that they will be the go-between the researchers and the private sector who may be requiring the results of their research, or the go-between between them and government, and much more. Most of this research, when we prepared for them, we often don't include the policymakers, decision makers, who may use this research result. Again, the trends are changing, and we are now beginning to look at, for example, the role of Federal Ministry of Health in medical research. Funders now will put a call out that we want you to involve some of the policymakers because they are bothered about the translational effect of that research to policy. It is now known that if you work alone as a researcher, you then find it a challenge to get the product of your research, no matter how important it is to the policymakers. And if the policymakers are not part of it from the beginning, then it becomes difficult to sell it to them. It becomes difficult for them to understand why they need to use that research result. Again, we also need to ensure that the communities or the populations where we expect that this research result will be used are also not just taken as participants, but they are also part of the research. We must not sit in our office and then design our own idea of research that is not solving the problem in the community. Because at the end of the day, when you take the result to the community, because they are not part of it, they don't understand, they also find it difficult to accept that change that you want to bring. So the trend these days is to ensure that you go into the community, you find out what the challenges are, and then you bring that into research ideas and projects, so that eventually, when you come up with a product or with a changing management system within the community, they will be able to imbibe them, and then, of course, the stakeholders will be able to practice them. So we have challenge of implementation once we do not involve the community and then, of course, the decision makers in the process of research. Thank you.
For your opening comments there, let me bring in Dr. Margaret. Dr. Margaret, you're an editor-in-chief of the Nigerian Journal of Pharmacy, and one frustration that most researchers have in Nigeria is funding. You know, I was wondering, if the private sector and the government come together, you know, to key into the initiative of funding researchers so that they can bring out their research and make the best use of it in national development or in policy making, how is it possible for them to get the funding? Because without funding, there's no research. I can't be sitting down here talking to you now if I didn't go through some little bit of research myself to get a little bit of information so that I can have an idea of what I'm going to talk about here. Let's have your take.
Thank you very much. You know, as editor-in-chief of the Nigerian Journal of Pharmacy, I can tell you that more than 50% of the research that comes out from Nigerian institutions usually are done with private funds from the researchers. So therein, right off the bat, you have a huge constraint to translation. So when it comes to funding, it's not just the government. The government must come in together with stakeholders, and the primary stakeholders are the companies that will facilitate translation of this research. Take, for example, we're looking at a medication for prevention of HIV. The stakeholders, the first stakeholders you would look at is the government, because this is tackling a public health issue. The second very primary stakeholder are the pharmaceutical companies that are going to go into manufacturing of these products. So right off the bat, funding must be made available. And when we talk about funding for research, it is very important that we look at funding for the researcher as well as for the research. And then looking at funding for research, making our universities and our research establishments and institutes well equipped to carry out relevant research. So the funding is the funding to be considered is in different areas, because when you look at dissemination of research, you look at stakeholder engagement, you want to have enough funding to be able to target your primary audience, engage with them early. Then you now look at opportunities representing building partnerships with established networks. So you need to use conferences, events, and this facilitates exchange of knowledge to raise awareness for the work. This kind of opportunities done with industries as well as governments is critical. So the funding must not be looked at not just for research, but for stakeholder engagement, building partnerships, and also looking at it in the text of full translation of the research. That is directly from your bench side to the public. So if you look at it that way, quite a number of Nigerian researchers have had international funding that they're able to do this work. But the disadvantage there is that when this funding comes from international donors, translation of research may not necessarily benefit those of us in the primary environment. So if we look critically at funding, the researcher must be funded. So that means that the researcher must earn well. That onus lies on the government. The researcher must have facilities to work with. That also lies on the government to properly fund research institutes and universities. Then the researcher must have funding for materials and translation. This falls on the industries that will help implementation of the research.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ilomoya, for your response. But as we indicated at the beginning of this conversation, the critical thing is the utilization of existing research findings. The back end, of course, has to do with how you get your funding, what you then research into. I think that Professor Salako already provided a framework and some of the issues that he raised, the boxes, of course, we can tick them off. I'm coming to Professor Emeje with regard to what we need to do, the processes, the stages that we need to follow end to end. It says, for instance, that researchers sometimes are more like careerists. In other words, they are more focused on their career development, get out your research findings, publish, and of course, you get your ranking, rather than on the utilization. We know that NIPRID has done tremendously well in terms of its research efforts. But we also know that some of those research efforts continue to stay on the shelf. Everybody talks about sickle cell, what NIPRID has done, and I'm sure you'll speak more on some of the other things. What are the issues with effective utilization of research findings and reports, say in the pharmaceutical research subsector?
Okay, thank you. And I'm very excited to have on set a research fellow who is a distinguished senator of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, seated here today. But like you said, the National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development is suitably placed to talk about this because we have success stories in this area on effective utilization on outcome of research. And that's why, for example, our sickle cell drug, which is the only one of that in the world, is out there currently in the market by a Nigerian pharmaceutical industry. So, and I want us to get that clearly so that because I want to respond to what are the challenges on effective utilization. That's the question you have asked me. I will look at it from two perspectives. One, the lack of strong political will by government. Two, the lack of will by the private sector. Because it is these two that will make it happen. It is these two that will make it happen because it is these two that made our Niprisan for sickle cell to happen. We did our work, government, fully funded by government. Then we established proof of concept by establishing what we call a spin-off. A spin-off is a pharmaceutical company that is owned by the research institution, so owned by government, but has some kind of autonomy. So it was able to to give birth to the relationship between the institution and the pharmaceutical industry. And so the pharmaceutical industry now took the product for which we have established proof of concept to the marketplace. Now, if government did not fund it the way we are as a nation today, it won't happen. If the private sector did not take it the way we are now, it will also not happen. So for me, that's where the problem lies. And, you know, when I was the national chairman of academic pharmacists, and to correct that, I'm not immediate past chairman, and I'm here today representing my director general, not as a former chairman of academic pharmacists. But that was what we took 18 months to try to solve and create that framework where there are over 200 pharmaceutical industries in Nigeria who are purely interested in importation of finished products or import minimal active pharmaceutical ingredients and make some dosage forms and sell. In other words, for me, they are not into manufacturing. We looked at them, we engaged, and if they tell you the problems they are facing, which is the reason they cannot support indigenous drug manufacturing, you will pity them. I'm not going to speak on that now since you didn't ask me. But government will always also tell you that there's limited funding. But we don't agree that there's limited funding because we see funds that is being expended on so many areas that we think are not as important as research and development. If research and development is a priority of government, we won't be where we are today. There will be clear funding for it. It's capital intensive. There will be clear policies on what should be done, and then we will have effective utilization of research results. So there must be strong linkage between government and the private sector if we have to effectively utilize research results. We have enormous research results, enormous basic research results. And when we talk about academics using publishing because they want to advance in their career, like Dr. Ilumaya said, if over 50% of researchers are using their own salary, which they are supposed to use to feed and pay school fees of their children, if they are using it to do research, what do you expect? You will not expect any responsible and responsive outcome that will translate, because even the sample sizes will be so limited that you cannot begin to think of translation.
Yeah, so Professor Ibeja, I'm sorry, let me interject. I earlier talked about the framework that Professor Salako set for this conversation. And some of the issues you have raised can actually be accommodated within that framework. So it's important for you to clarify, because in talking about government's lack of will and then the private sector's, if you may, indifference or lukewarm attitude to all of this, Professor Salako said, almost proffering solutions to say that a researcher must or should strive to engage with the policy makers so you get their buy-in before you proceed. And if you did that, the policy makers will of course include government. The same thing with the private sector and the community. Have we had this kind of attitude in the past to say, look, let's get on, let's, like pre-testing the policy makers, pre-testing the community, pre-testing the ultimate users or the manufacturers of the outcomes of your research before you get neck deep into it?
I believe it is called grip, isn't it?
The answer is simple. It's simple because you do not expect me to use my salary to engage government. So first there has to be R&D roadmap. Government decides that this is the focus of government. This is the research and development focus of government at this period. Okay? So, and we are provide, because you can't say this is my priority, this is my strategic plan, and you don't fund your strategic plan. So you fund your strategic plan. And if you are funding it, the funding for engagement is also there. So the funding for engagement is also there. That's why I'm telling you, for example, when we talk about our story,
that's an academic.
Yes.
The policy maker who designs this framework, and by the way, we have an STI framework now. There's a research, there's a Research and Innovation Council.
Yes.
But I'm saying, but you are the researcher. You are in the ivory tower.
Yes.
And by serendipity, you can strike upon an idea never previously contemplated by the policy maker. It is not for you to say, policy maker, this is what we have. You tease the person. I think that's what Professor Salato is saying. He will have the opportunity of course, engaging you on this.
Sorry, that's
Prof,
very, you see serendipity. We have not even finished with the one we know. So let's leave the serendipity alone, because it's when you are working that there will be serendipity. Okay? So, but the point I'm making is, you do not expect research fellows who are under remunerated to begin to plan into their own research design and deployment towards career development, engagement with the stakeholders. No. Because, but as a nation, we should have R&D priorities. Those R&D priorities, and that's how we got our sickle cell medicine. If we were waiting for researchers to come up with how to engage, we won't go there. But because in that plan of developing a product for management of sickle cell, the stakeholder engagement was strong, was there. By the way, it was the Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Group of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria that teamed up with the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria and collaborated with government to make this happen. So it's not individual researchers that will do, but you see, the individual researchers are just field workers who are there ready to work. They are like the military guys or the security guys waiting to be given the necessary facilities for them to do the work.
Yeah, Professor Major, thank you very much. I know that Juma will come in here. In the military, as in a larger society, you also have the intelligence community. The intelligence community will gather intelligence and advise the policy maker, the political leaders, and say, this is what we foresee. This is a trend. The policy maker or the political leaders have no idea what these guys will pick up until they pick them up and trigger their reaction. So they form part of the military. The military would not just sit by and say they are waiting for direction from the leadership. This, I think that's, we are virtually saying the same thing. But what I'm saying is that you seem to say, okay, now let's get our back to the wall.
No. No.
All right. So
you didn't get me. What I think, and I think I agree that we are virtually saying the same thing. The guys on the field, they are the experts. They are ready. They produce. In fact, when we talk about the strategic plan, they are the ones that produce it now. All of this framework and what should be done are there, but these are all on paper. They don't take themselves to the factory. Okay, so but to be able to move to the factory, it's no longer about writing the letters. It's not about communicating to the ministry or to government or to National Assembly. In fact, it's not about just going to defend the budget at the National Assembly. And I was engaging the distinguished senator out of this place, and I told him all the things that as a research fellow he is not doing for us, but that for coming on the television to say that I'm a research fellow, he is actually very highly encouraging us. And he told me many things that we are supposed to do, which include telling them how to know what should be done in the language. Now, I'm saying that because it is very, very important that we know and we stop saying that researchers, academics in Nigeria are just there doing their work, publishing to advance their career. Academics all over the world, they do their research to advance their career. So it's not a Nigerian issue, it's not a sin. Okay? But governments all over the world who are interested in developing their country and who understand that research and development is fundamental to any country becoming useful to itself and to the outside world, we develop plan. We sit, in fact, you will call researchers to come and sit down. Look, sit down here. This is what we want. This is where we want our country to be in the next 5 years. Draw a roadmap for that, and you fund it. That's how it's done. Now, check if you also, we can also carry out a study, and I'm telling you from point of information and knowledge that very many of our academics in Nigeria are doing research and publishing in high impact factor journals like Professor Salako said. Do you know why? They are being funded heavily by international communities, different funders. But the result is not for you because you didn't fund them.
I thought Dr. Margaret Ilo Amoya referenced that to say that when you get funded externally,
yes,
the utilization goes elsewhere. We'll
yes, because that's the funder.
Yeah, Professor Emeje will pause you here and bring in distinguished Senator Sabe Abdullahi to weigh in a number of issues on the table. So take your bearing from anywhere you choose.
Well, thank you very much. I find this topic very, very exciting and interesting. And I think from the three, speakers this morning, there are quite a number of, issues that have been a misconception and will continue to be. First, let me address the first one. There is the issue of mindset. I think the researcher in Nigeria must change the mindset. Our mindset is still anchored on some of the issues raised by Prof. And I think we had some debate about it earlier before we got into this sitting. And what I meant here is, we have been saying government. But let's ask, who is government? You are an employee of government.
Yes.
Given a responsibility in the pharmaceutical sector. Very clear. Professor Salako has been given responsibility in the medical research sector. As far as those areas are concerned, you are the face of government as far as those subject matters are concerned. Now, what I'm saying here is, if you assume it is the Minister of Health or the Director in the Ministry of Health that should come and paraphrase issues that should be brought forward as priority, that mindset is wrong. Now, let's understand one fact. For research results to come out meaningfully, to be utilized, it must be the product of a demand. And I believe we must emphasize on demand-driven research agenda. But I make it bold to say here, the bulk of our research, even from the submissions by the three other guests, is clear. It is not necessarily on the basis of demand in country. Some, based on funding outside, are based on demand outside the country. Because for anybody who is funding you, every research has an objective. And those objectives are clearly stated by that person who wants to fund it. So, in the case of our research system here, when it comes to the issue of policy, let me say that government understood these issues very clearly, and it goes back to more than 30 years ago. Remember, in the 70s, 80s, we used to have an omnibus research system. Government realized that those omnibus research systems are not working because they are cut off from their sectoral domain. That explains why you are having the Nigerian Institute of Medical Research domiciled in the Federal Ministry of Health. The idea there is to chain link the various research institutes to their sectoral development agendas. And when you do that, then the people who are saddled with that responsibility have a duty to convince the policy makers that, look, this is the development agenda we have seen this country is pursuing. You have this area, you have that area, and in this area, we are the experts, and we realize that there are constraints that must be solved using the research endeavor. When this is done, definitely, you realize that if you are doing it well, by the standard protocol of every research system, you have to even do first your diagnostic study to even know what are the constraints out there. Because when you sit down in your office, what you think is the constraint may not necessarily be the constraint that the stakeholders are talking about. And I'm happy you pointed one out with the example of your success flagship product, Niprisan, or I don't know the name now, where you talked about the import or the participation of the manufacturing group of the Pharmaceutical Society. That is how it should be. And I think Professor Salako also alluded to some of these things as gaps that have been existing, and he is saying things are changing and they need to change very fast. So to my mind, coming back to the subject matter of utilizing research findings,
Yeah.
from my own experience, when research findings are the product of a strong demand by either industry users or even consumers, I want to assure you their uptake and utilization is almost guaranteed 100%. So I knew for a fact that there are a lot of effort to fund research in the system. But the question also from the perspective of the policymakers and the, in quote, government you talked about, what is the integrity of our research? What is the integrity of our research? You realize that when it comes to research, what you come out to give out as your data, what you come out to give out as your facts, must be things that are well trusted, and of course, they can be fact-checked. Now, like you said, obviously, when somebody's agenda is for him to just do the research work that will get in, some publications, that agenda will not go far. So I think, to my mind, what I would like to see first is that every research findings that is being utilized should be a product of a very strong demand. That is the first point. Now, in terms of utilization also, I'm happy you talked about the proof of concept. Most times, most of these research products are at the prototype level. Many people don't take it to the proof of concept level. And for you to do that, you know, requires a lot of things. Yes. Now, even within the research institute, for example, who is supposed to give you direction on how you are going to apply your funding? For a fact, I will tell you, while I was in the system, we did a study, and we realized that if you give a research institute 100 million, less than 20% of that 100 million goes into actually addressing the research need in terms of the mandate of the institute. Who is doing that? It's the chief executives. So these are also challenges, and that is why at the end of the day, and you know, for every research project, if you are going to run a research project for 5 years, and you start funding the first year, second year, third year, and there is a hitch, if care is not taken, depending on the research, yes, you've lost everything, and you must have to go back to square zero again. Yes. And there are quite a number of these cases out there. And that explains why, for example, I remember we came up with what we call consultative, what do they call it, research grant scheme. Research grant scheme was brought about to first look at the development in the Ministry of Agriculture, for example, in the ARCN. We looked at the ATA, Agricultural Transformation Agenda then. And then we looked at what are the demands in terms of areas where research is required to make ATA very successful. So within that context, we prioritized our research agenda. And I remember priority setting, research priority setting is a very, very powerful, a tool that every research organization must do. Because like you know, you don't have all the funds. Yes. And so you are competing with limited resources, so you have to prioritize. And I know for a fact, for example, when we did a priority setting exercise involving international bodies, involving stakeholders from the country, we came up to realize that, look, food security is the #1 priority in terms of the policy of government. And of course, you can understand why. If a nation cannot feed its people, that nation is sick. So food security, for example, becomes a priority. Within that context, you now have to ask, what are the commodities that will be addressing food security? That was what we did. And we realized things like staple crops, talking about cassava, yam, rice, maize. These are all commodities that should be prioritized. And what that means is that with the limited resources you are having, we will prefer, if we are to take that priority setting exercise far, is to say this should be the priority. And I think in the case of, for example, Medical Research Institute that Professor Salako is heading, I believe if they do a priority setting, they will realize of all the health challenges in the country, which one should be our #1 priority. When you do that, then you can deploy more resources there so that you can succeed in what you are doing. Now, the other point I would like to clarify is simple. When you sit down and assume that a policy maker ought to understand you, then that is what I call dangerous assumption. You are assuming dangerously. For the policymaker, his own thinking is different. He doesn't even understand what research means. So in terms of relevance, he has low relevance to what you are doing as a researcher. But what of influence? He has very high influence because he allocates resources. So you have a duty, remember we discussed this.
Yes.
You have a duty to come out with very clear communication strategy that will allow the policymaker to see that, look, this is the reason why, both in terms of cost benefit, both in terms of social benefit, why we should concentrate on this research. And I think the case of sickle cell that you cited is a very classical case, because there is no family today that is suffering from, that has a child that is suffering from sickle cell that will not understand what you are talking about. Even neighbors will understand a neighbor to a family that have a sickle cell, because when there is a crisis, it's more or less like, in fact, the entire neighborhood. So these are the kind of things we have to begin to convince policymakers. And like I said, the only pathway to getting a policymaker to understand what you are doing is for you to increase communication. And when I mean communication, simple communication. Most of our research institutes do not even have a communication department. We take it for granted. And I've come to realize countries that are doing very well, which we have studied in the past, like Brazil, in comparison with the agriculture sector, we realize they are doing a management kind of research management, whereby every component of these things are captured ab initio, in terms of the frequency of information that must go out, how it should go out, who should get it, what should be the target. Even their publication, they will tell you, if you do this, this country is going to benefit in terms of reducing social dependence, it's going to benefit in terms of creating this number of jobs, and so on and so forth. Most times our research system do not provide this information to the policymaker. So the policymaker will just sit down and say, these people just want us to give them money. They will bring paper. That's it. Now, that is one side. The other side is that the research system also must begin to look at the link between the basic research in the universities to the actual applied research that happens in the research institute system. Because if you check, for example, I will give you an example. There are PhD reports all over the internet. There are some, when you click, they will tell you it's not available because somebody paid for it. Now, in Nigeria, I notice a number of our PhD holders, there is no system that is linking them to sectoral development agenda. Who is supposed to do this? It's the researchers. Because we are the ones who understand these things. So that's why I'm saying, let's stop passing the buck. Who is government? Those who are saddled with responsibility are government. Government is not a ghost. Government is a collection of people given responsibilities. And those responsibilities are compartmentalized according to knowledge set, according to knowledge base, according to knowledge expertise. So that at the end of the day, when you come out and speak, you are speaking from a standpoint of knowledge, and you should be able to guide the people who should be guided. But when these communications are not coming out, all that they see is you come out with a very beautiful research report. How many policymakers can read research report? They won't look at it. I knew cases where our researchers will bring in their research findings, and at the end of the day, when we send it to the policymakers, they just take it and throw it aside. Sometimes you even go out in Abuja here, you see them being used to rap suya and other things that, so that's the kind of things you get. But you see,
or kilichi.
Yes, when you sit down and you reduce your complex information to simple information, to say, for example, the sickle cell thing you are talking about. If by the time government knows, in Nigeria we have social number of families that are affected, and out of them brilliant people are there, and because they are impacted, they are not able to contribute. You can now see the impact pathway. You must trace your impact pathway. That way you can now convince a researcher to journey with you to see the impact and how many years it's going to take to bring out that impact. So those are the issues that, to my mind, must be addressed. Now, lastly, when you talk about public sector, research in the public sector is actually addressing areas of market failure. Serious private sector people, they will not wait for you. They know where to go and get their knowledge, get their research results, and to use. And you know, most of the private sector in Nigeria, they are multinationals. Their research house is situated somewhere. And when they bring things here, they are just trying to confirm based on the principle of multilocational trial to see if this thing tried in Nigeria will give me the same result. That means the goal and objective ab initio is not for you. It's for him. So, but the issue is, for you to get the private sector in Nigeria, first there are fundamental issues that must be addressed. The issue of patent, intellectual property right. And I will tell you, majority of the research results are not patentable. That's where we have the issue. Because patent is a different ballgame entirely. The issue of newness, innovativeness, the issue of not copying somebody's own, and so many other things. We need to address those issues. When a private sector knows that there is a guarantee there, and that if anybody comes to touch it, he can go to court and get justice for that infraction, then they will be more than willing to pump in their money. But you see, the bulk of the things, because there are market failure issues, when you do this research, you cannot stop other people from utilizing it. And these are externalities that the research system are not able to handle. And so for me, it means we must go back into making sure our development agenda as researchers is keyed into the sectoral development objectives. That way, we can be accommodated in terms of the political will you talked about, because it's a function of bringing in all the things that will make what the politicians say or the policymaker say he wants to do successful. If he cannot see the success and he cannot see the horizon, I want to assure you he's not going to buy into it. So these are the points I thought I should react to. But I definitely believe that Nigerian researchers are among the best, and that it's just a matter of the system. If we can create a system where we can increase the integrity of our research system, increase the level of participation so that we are able to have a demand-driven research agenda, then all of this issue of our utilization can be properly addressed over the long time.
You talked about the integrity of the reports. Most times, these researchers, when they take these reports outside this country, boom, there's accolades, respect.
Thank you.
So what is happening here now?
Yes. Like we said, you talked about when they take it outside. The bulk of the research work you are talking about, from what you can see, are funded outside. And in terms of...
That means it does not address the problems in Nigeria?
Yes, the bulk of it. Not that, like I said, you see, not that they are not interested.
Exactly.
But you see, a researcher cannot sit down with redundancy.
Yes.
So, if he's trying to get his work done, anywhere funding comes in, he takes. So, within that context, what I'm trying to say is that the integrity of such kind of research is guaranteed, because the protocol itself, by the time it's approved, have processes through which it came about. And that is part of the integrity check. Now, in terms of the ones he's talking about, the other leg of it is that many researchers are just battling. If I don't publish, I perish. That's why we talk about the publish or perish syndrome in the research system. Because for him to be promoted, he must be able to produce journal papers with certain specification, conferences, seminars, and the like. The criteria are there. If you don't meet it up, you are going to remain there. If a young man comes in and meets it up, he becomes your senior. Nobody wants that. So within that context, like he said, he's going to do those things that will guarantee him the publication first. So the integrity of that is to the extent of his own interest. The person who is outside may not necessarily believe in what was being done. That is the issue of the integrity. I know in using this language, all of them as researchers understand what I'm talking about. You see, research has processes. It is those processes done properly.
Methodology.
Yes, done properly that guarantees the integrity of whatever you come out with in the end of your exercise. I think that is the point I'm saying. I'm not saying to the extent that maybe the researchers are fraudulent. No, it's to the extent that they are not able to fund the complete participation that will allow people to see through the stages. So that at the end of the day, by the time they are saying it, there is comfort that I was aware. Unlike the ones that are funded from outside, the development of the research protocol will have involved several, seminars, several critique. All these things are expensive. I think that is the point he was also trying to bring forward earlier.
Okay.
And I think in terms of budgeting also, the last point, when it comes to budgeting, up to this very moment, Nigeria has blatantly refused to understand how we should budget for the research system. Is research a capital expenditure? Yes. Is research an recurrent expenditure? Yes. So, to that extent, I recalled at a point we were having this debate, and we said the best way to address research funding in Nigeria is to classify research as a capital product or capital expenditure. And in doing so, there are three categories: administrative research or administrative capital, which means for NIPRID, for example, they need a laboratory to put in their equipment. That laboratory is administrative, but they need it. Then you have developmental capital, whereby the product of what he has brought out now is going to enhance the development of the country, because in a way it's going to cut down on the number of people suffering from. Then you have program. When you say program, for example, if they are going to do clinical trials of any drug they have produced, they will need a sample size of 5,000 patients, for example, until you see the syringes that they use in applying the drug to the patient. If you see a patient and they tell you this patient has taken our drug, you may not believe it. So those kind of expenditure are program capital. And I believe if this is done, then the research system can begin to be given a pride of place. The idea of saying capital project as only buildings, buying motors, buying things you can physically see is what has led us into relegating the research system to where it is.
Okay. Senator Sabi will return to all our guests in the course of the program. As it begins to wind down, we'll talk about bridging the gap and how we can integrate, research into policy making. We'll take a break. When we return, our conversation will continue. Do stay.
Your skill is key to your professional growth in the competitive broadcast media industry. Take advantage of the following programs specially packaged by NTA Television College JOS to upgrade your skill. Computer General Application, date 8 May to 19th May 2023, 2 weeks. English Grammar and Pronunciation for Broadcasters, date 22nd May to 9th June 2023, 3 weeks. Basic Broadcast Accounting and Auditing, date 22nd May to 9th June 2023, 3 weeks. Marketing in the Era of Digital Broadcast, date 13th June to 23rd June 2023, 2 weeks. Drama Production Workshop, date 3rd July to 21st July 2023, 3 weeks. Intermediate Online News Reporting Skills, date 24th July to 11th August 2023, 3 weeks. The course fee for the 2-week course is 120,000 Naira, while the fee for the 3-week course is 150,000 Naira only. Accommodation inclusive. All courses will hold at NTA Television College near Old Government House, Rayfield, Jos. For further inquiries, please call 0803-079-5335 or 0806-980-9807. NTA Television College Jos, training you to be the best you want to be. Registrar Announcer.
All I need to say about the second River Niger Bridge, 21 years ago, as I came onto this throne, it will normally take you 3 to 4 hours to cross the bridge. I mean, if you are going to Lagos, you spent almost half your time on the bridge, and you were stuck on the bridge before you came across from Asaba this morning. Now, could you imagine how the people of Onitsha and Asaba have endured such a situation for over 25, 30 years? This is reality. We cannot overestimate the importance of the second River Niger Bridge. To express appreciation to our President, Muhammadu Buhari, for being the vehicle for the execution of this monumental project.
My name is Kufre Jerome Pats. I'm one of the Empower beneficiaries. The name of Empower, it was online registration. After that, you upload everything through net. At the end of it now, they shortlisted me. So I went for physical verification. After that, they are now giving me the posting, post me to my primary assignment, ETC.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Of course, if you've been following the conversation this morning, you would have received a great deal of information, a great deal of enlightenment about researching, the research findings and reports, as well as the utilization of such findings. Let's go back to Professor Salako, the CEO of the Medical Research Institute in Lagos. Professor Salako, as I said, you laid the framework or the foundation for this conversation with the guideposts that you provided, and those guideposts perhaps have been breached or perhaps further elaborated upon or fairly populated within the parameters that you indicated. I just want to leave the floor open for you to respond to issues you consider relevant at this time in the conversation.
Thank you very much. You see, it's important to put research governance in proper perspective in relation to its role in the use of research results. And I need to say also that for health research in particular, government actually has committees responsible for oversight on research established by law. The Health Act that was recently reviewed created two committees, the National Health Research Ethics Committee, which looks into research integrity in terms of approval, the consent, the necessary elements that researchers need to fulfill before the projects are approved. And this is what creates standards for research in any country, such that when the results are out, they can't be monitored and then seen as a research result that has come out with integrity. So as the distinguished senator was saying, we have a process for that, very well established. And then there's also National Health Research Committee, which also advises the Honorable Minister on creating research priorities and policy. I must also say that we do have research priorities and policies created. It's recently been reviewed in 2022 and will soon be published. But the challenges are the priorities are not well disseminated to researchers in the universities. But this time around, once we have the final copies, we will be doing that, so that researchers within the Nigerian research ecosystem will know which area of research they need to focus on. This is priority areas set by government. And so results of such research will be very useful and interesting to policymakers in Nigeria, because the agendas have been set by them. And of course, the agendas were also set not just by the policymakers in the ministry alone, by international communities who are members of that the small stakeholder group that put this together. The university researchers in Nigerian institutes all came together to form that policy. Now, what is important that I want the distinguished senator to take a second look at is the issue of funding. There is no way we are going to talk about funding without talking about government, because government everywhere in the world funds research, and the researchers in such countries are able to access funding that address the research priorities that such countries have set up. In our own case, we do have priorities set, but we do not have funding particularly released for such priorities. And that is why researchers cannot conduct transitional research that will lead into policy brief or lead into product development. Even when we generate new knowledge, they are not very standard that you could put into practice. For example, we talk about clinical trials. Clinical trials require large amount of money. Again, I agree that government cannot support clinical trial. This is business. And the other aspect of research, use of research result, is for us researchers to be able to convince the private sector, the business in health research, the fact that products can be developed, the fact that spin-off companies can arise and people can get jobs and companies can produce this and sell them. The economy in research needs to be well focused on for private sector to be able to put funding in research and then for them to be able to use these research results. So these are areas that we must allow government to support in terms of providing funding. We have recently asked for creation of Nigerian Medical Research Council to support and fund health research in Nigeria. Because as we speak, there is none. What we have funding research generally in Nigeria is TED Fund. TED Fund is limited only to tertiary institutes, the universities. The research institutes are not able to access that fund. And of course, what TED Fund is getting is okay, but not enough for research in Nigeria generally. But we must also thank government, at least they are putting something there. But we needed a specific funding for health research in Nigeria. So we hope that the House will support the creation of that council so that health researchers in Nigeria can be able to face the research priorities that have been set by the Federal Ministry of Health and address our health challenges within that space. Now, the other bit that I would like to mention is that when researchers in Nigeria are able to come up with products, we require political support, policies that will allow Nigerians to use those research results. Don't forget that most of the things that we produce have to compete with the ones that are coming from other countries, which have been in market for many years. And people have used to this. They may not want to use the new one. So we need some little policy support, even though we expect that validation would have been done and that it would have been compared to gold standard and seen to work as much as those ones or even better than them. But the fact that they are just coming to the market, they have to compete. And for us to get them used in our country, we need government policy to support this. This is something that is lacking. In our situation here, we have created diagnostic kits, about 5 or so of them. We've been able to sell one out during the COVID era. We needed government to support us to say that since these have been found to be very useful and have been validated and has been seen to work as gold standard, then Nigerian hospitals and laboratories should be advised to use them. This is something that has to be done through our regulatory agency. And therefore, regulatory agencies also have to look at how best they can assist such new products to get registered without really flouting the standard that has been created. But we needed to get them to support this. Otherwise, we are going to be creating research products that will not see the light of the day. They will not be able to compete very well in the market because we are already used to the standards that have been brought from outside the country. So these are the areas I believe government can support researchers to be able to move things forward so we can begin to use what we produce. That is a step that's needed to be taken by government. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Babantunde Salako. We thank you for your response, and you also raised some pertinent questions that I believe Dr. Margaret would like to talk about.
Thank you very much. It has actually been a very robust conversation, and I really thank the Honorable Senator Abdullahi for his comments. But I will say this and say it very frankly. The average researcher in Nigeria has excellent mindset, but the system is not excellent. When you know you want to utilize research findings and reports, how many of our universities have light 4 to 6 hours in a day? How many of the universities have access to water available for research? How many of the universities have laboratories? If you look at it statistically, 95% of funded researches that come from abroad are translated into products that are utilized in Nigeria. So there is demand for research products. If you look at the COVID vaccine, there were Nigerians on the team in Oxford University, 2 of whom migrated from Nigerian universities, and we use those COVID vaccines in Nigeria. We are looking at the malaria vaccine. We should go and look at the team that developed the malaria vaccine that is being brought in country. Some of those researchers migrated from Nigeria. So it is not about the mindset of researchers. If we want to utilize research findings in Nigeria, government must put their money where their mouth is. And once government funds research, we will be able to hold the industry to implement research. If we look at the integrity of research, virtually all internationally funded researchers have excellently high integrity because the researcher is confident that his funding is finally going to be translated. So it is about creating an enabling environment. When you create an enabling environment, if I have a product that can cure malaria, that enabling environment enables me to interact with policymakers, interact with the patent industry, and get that product off the shelf. Of course, when you talk about the systems linking sectoral agenda, this is very, very critical. And I specifically agree with that, because once you want to utilize research, you must always have to link all the sectors. So basically, we look at it via different angles. Your stakeholders in research, this will be necessary to include to increase likelihood of producing useful research findings that will lead to market. So it means that if you want to utilize the research, you must fund the researcher, fund his laboratory so that he can access stakeholders. The second strategy that we should look at if we want to utilize research is to design and evaluate pilot projects. These are already done by researchers. But to enhance the potential for future replication and scale-up, we require collaboration with agency, getting policy, just like Professor Salako mentioned, that if these products are developed and are deemed useful, they must be used in Nigeria, and their use must supersede that of the imports. So if you have those policies, then potential for future replication and scale up by the pharmaceutical industry or whichever industry that product is developed from becomes more feasible. And once there is availability of scale up, you see that the industry guys will be very happy to come on board because they will be there to make a profit. Then if you look at the third strategy, to develop and implement a plan for disseminating research findings to key audiences.
All right, Dr. Margaret Ilomoya, thank you very much for your views. We're getting pressed for time, at least for this segment of the conversation. Obviously, there are many more perspectives to explore. We will be continuing the conversation tomorrow. A number of other critical issues that we haven't touched on. They've been raised, but we haven't touched on them, including more particularly intellectual property issues. I think Dr. Distinguished Senator Sabi Abdullahi raised that. Focus on patents. And Umar Bindri, who's a regular on Good Morning Nigeria, wants to raise this question. And this is not, of course, to put down any research institute or indeed universities, that at convocation ceremonies in Nigerian universities, you live through the fat volumes that are published, and it is in vain that you will see patents registered by scholars or researchers in that institution. And why is this so? So these are issues, of course, we'll take up in the second leg of the conversation. But before we wrap up for today, I just want to get the closing thoughts of Professor Emeje very briefly, because we're pressed for time now, and Distinguished Senator Sabi Abdullahi pressed for time. Get this in 30 seconds each, and then we close. Very quickly, Professor Emeje.
Okay. Well, there are so many things to say, and it's unfair to ask me to talk in 30 seconds.
Yeah, but we are pressed for
let
time.
me just say,
Yes.
let me just say that.
We have less than 2 minutes to round up.
let me just say that all that Professor Salako has said and Dr. Elomaya has said, I align with them, and largely with the distinguished senator, but I disagree with him on so many fronts, and there are no time to do that. We will do that because we have become friends now. We'll do that outside. Because when you talk about government, for example, I mean, he's more government than me. We all know that government is in different stages, because the bigger your influence, the bigger you are in government. If you can determine what I become, then you are more government than I am, and that's why we're asking for funding. Now, let me just summarize it this way. You see, the fact that Nigerian academics are able to get competitive grants, and I'm not talking about donation, I'm talking of competitive grants. That means we compete with academics from all other parts of the world, and we win. That alone tells you that our proposal is of international standard.
Okay, on that note.
Hey.
Your 30 seconds.
Thank you very much.
In 30 seconds.
Yes, I think one of the points that I want to drop, given the fact that you're going to go into a second phase tomorrow, is for every industry to uptake products from a perceived market failure segment of our economy, there must be incentive. And I think that incentivization is also a policy that is missing somewhere. Now, the other aspect is that, yes, you talked about, I'm happy he alluded to the issue of research priority, demand-driven, but I think the critical aspect about funding, which Dr. Mary talked about, is what is the funding model of our research in Nigeria? We cannot just depend only on annual capital estimates. You should have funding models. And that is why the Competitive Agricultural Research Grant Scheme, for example, is a funding model, but it was not sustained. So competitive grants are part of the funding models. You have other, kind of models too, where you have funds. For example, you look at a sector where you are importing all the medications you are importing, you take a percentage of it and put it in a research fund. These are the missing link, because for you to depend on annual budget means the vagary of funding will affect your research. Those people who fund you outside, they give you assured research. You have 3 years. Every single moment you are supposed to have funding, that money will drop because it's guaranteed. That is the kind of things we must work out.
You'll be researching an environment where you don't have light, where you don't have water. That is even when the money is coming from outside. That's why you don't complain. But you already tell them that you don't have light, you don't have water.
Gentlemen, we're out of time.
Those are part of it. Maybe they will provide you with generator.
We're out of time. Senate Deputy Chief Whip, Senator
I'll give you generator.
Thank you so much for insightful contribution.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure to be here. And also, Professor Martins Emeje, he's a representative of the DG of NIPRIT here. He's not coming here in his capacity as past national chairman, academic pharmacist in Nigeria. Thank you so much. Now that you've become friends, I'm sure the conversation will go beyond Good Morning Nigeria.
Yes, definitely. He's in trouble now.
Okay. Professor Babatunde Salako, he's the DG CEO, National Institute of Medical Research. Thank you so much for your insight and, telling us how to bridge the gap, by integrating, research with policy making. And we thank you so much. And Dr. Margaret Ilomuya, she's the Professor of Pharmaceutics and Pharmaceutical Technology, Faculty of Pharmacy, University of Lagos, who is also an editor-in-chief, Nigerian Journal, so she's part of our journalistic family. Thank you so much for coming.
No, she's an academic editor-in-chief.
Yes, but it's still a publication, yes.
It's not a journalist. It's a circumscribed editor-in-chief.
Dr. Margaret Kisley is saying you are not part of us. Thank you so much.
She's not a journalist.
Well, that's how Good Morning Nigeria has been this morning. Thank you so much for staying with us, watching our program, and getting So much information from our guests this morning. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. I am Jumai Yusuf.
Join us again tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm Kingsley Osadola. Look after yourselves.
Kingsley will be here.
Nigeria is your daily tonic of accurate, fact-based, and intellectual